Avi says, destiny doesn't take anything from you. It just forces you to look where you never would have dared. I remember the day of the will as if I were still sitting in that room that smelled of expensive perfume and shame. The curtains were thick, white linen, and the light came through them filtered and shy, as if even the sun were embarrassed to witness that family spectacle. My mother, in immaculate mourning, wore a smile carved from ice. Gemma, my sister, pretended to be sad, but the way she toyed with our grandmother's diamond ring gave her away. I was just tired. The notary read the names with the voice of a machine: inheritances, properties, shares, everything perfectly distributed. Until he reached my name. To Miss Olivia Gale, the youngest daughter, is assigned the rural property known as Red Hill Ranch, located 380 kilometers from Perth, in a desert zone, covering 40 hectares. Silence. Then, my Aunt Charlotte's muffled laugh. The ranch, someone whispered. There isn't even water there. My father nodded, as if he'd just delivered a moral lesson. So she can learn the value of work, he said. He didn't look at me. Didn't give me a chance to reply. Just signed the papers, closed the folder, and stood up, case closed. That was the last time I saw him alive. The drive to the ranch took almost 5 hours. The asphalt slowly disappeared, fading into a thin red dirt road that snaked between dry hills. The truck, an old Ford barely holding itself together under the heat, rattled like it was ready to die. In the passenger seat sat a box with the few things I'd managed to rescue from my apartment in Perth: a couple of books, a portable coffee maker, a notebook, and an old photograph of my grandfather Arthur. The silence of the landscape was overwhelming. The sky, steel blue and cloudless, looked like a sheet of molten metal. There was something hypnotic about that vast emptiness. For the first time in a long while, no one was watching me, no one expected anything from me. By the time I arrived, the sun was sinking. Shadows stretched long and thin, almost human. The main house was a ruin: cracked walls, half-collapsed roof, a rotted fence barely upright. No electricity, no water, no phone signal. Only the hum of insects and the wind slipping through the cracks. That first night, I slept on the floor, wrapped in an old blanket atop a sleeping bag. I looked up through the holes in the ceiling and, between the stars, felt something like calm, or defeat. I couldn't tell the difference. What I did know was that, for the first time in years, no one could tell me who I was supposed to be. The following days became a routine of dust and exhaustion. I woke with the sun, inspected the structures, made small repairs with what little I had. I found a dry well behind the stable and tried to bring it back to life. No luck. The water had surrendered to the desert. Sometimes, eating beans from a can in the fractured shade of the porch, I thought about Gemma. Her perfect smile for the reporters, the way she said my name like it was an inconvenience. She'd always been the perfect daughter, brilliant, obedient, beautiful. I was the shadow meant to make her shine brighter. Yet now, that light seemed fake to me, like the glint of cheap jewelry under the sun. One afternoon, while searching for tools in the old barn, I found a metal box, rusted and covered in dust. On the lid, barely visible, was engraved a name: Arthur Gale. My grandfather. The man no one in the family liked to talk about. They said he'd been a genius, but also a madman. He died when I was 6, and all I remembered of him was the smell of metal and strong coffee. The box was locked, but the padlock gave way after one blow with a shovel. Inside were notebooks, blueprints, jars with mineral samples, and a letter folded in 4, handwritten. The future of our blood isn't in the banks, Olivia. It's beneath our feet. But not everyone will know how to see it. When you do, don't share the discovery. Protect yourself from those who confuse inheritance with power. Arthur. A chill ran through me. My grandfather was speaking from another time, as if he knew exactly what I was living. I spent hours going through his papers, complex diagrams, machinery sketches, calculations on density and conductivity. In the margins, technical notes and equations I only half understood. And on several pages, written like a signature, one word repeated: lithium. Lithium. In recent years I'd heard it called the white gold of the future. Australia held some of the largest reserves in the world, and corporations fought over every grain. But why had my grandfather been studying it? And why had he hidden his work? I became obsessed with finding out. From a roadside cafe, I searched online, downloaded scientific papers, even contacted a geologist friend from university. They all said the same thing: the area around the ranch didn't appear on any official exploration maps. The land was considered worthless, unviable, as the notary had said, because the soil showed no signs of mineral value. But my grandfather had written something else. Next to a sketch of a hill, he'd noted, "The surface lies. The treasure's deeper." I decided to test it. I rented a mining prospect drone with geoelectric sensors. It cost me nearly all my savings, and started scanning the area. The first flights showed nothing. But on the third, over a dry canyon 2 kilometers from the ranch, the drone detected anomalies underground, dense metallic mineralization. My hands shook as I read the report. I checked the data again and again. The pattern matched a high lithium concentration. I couldn't believe it. There, on that useless piece of land, lay something that could change everything. The following weeks blurred into a mix of euphoria and exhaustion. I dug the first test wells with my own hands. The sun split my skin, my nails broke, my lips cracked from dryness. But with each day that passed, I got closer to something that no longer felt like a possibility. It was a truth buried deep. One afternoon, as I was clearing the edges of a pit, I found fragments of rock with a pale, shimmering glow. I sealed them in a jar and drove to the nearest city for analysis. The results were undeniable: lithium carbonate, of exceptional purity. I remember laughing alone in the car, a strange sound, halfway between sobbing and relief. No one had left me with nothing. They had left me with everything, they just didn't know it. That night, back at the ranch, I opened a bottle of cheap wine and drank a toast alone. Not for revenge, but for justice. For Grandpa Arthur, who had seen the future long before anyone else. For me, who had found it where no one dared to look. And as the wind howled in the darkness, I felt something ignite inside me. A spark. The first of many. I didn't sleep much after that night. I spent hours staring at the rocks spread across the table, as if they were fragments of a prophecy. I couldn't stop thinking about my grandfather and that line of his, "The treasure lies deeper." He had been right. But the question now was, what would I do with it? The next morning, I went out with a blank notebook and began mapping the perimeter of the land. I walked for hours, marking reference points, noting the slope of the ground, the cracks, the erosion patterns. Every detail mattered. The sun beat on the back of my neck, but I didn't feel tired. I felt purpose. For the first time, the silence of the desert didn't intimidate me. It was a promise. A language only I seemed to understand. With the little savings I had left, I bought a small solar generator, some basic tools, and an old laptop. I turned the abandoned ranch kitchen into a makeshift lab. Among cables, tubes, and blueprints, I tried to decipher my grandfather's designs. It wasn't easy. His lithium extraction system resembled nothing I'd seen before. Most modern methods rely on vast amounts of water and corrosive chemicals. His, however, seemed to harness natural reactions, pressure, temperature, and a catalytic compound of his own design. I spent countless nights reading through his notes. There was a strange beauty to his formulas, a kind of industrial poetry. Sometimes, as sleep overtook me, I thought I heard his voice whispering from the shadows, "Don't share it yet. They're not ready to understand." And he was right. No one was. A month after the discovery, I decided to run a test. I built a small-scale prototype out of steel pipes, valves, and a hand pump system. If it worked, I could extract samples without harming the environment. It took 3 days to assemble, and almost 3 hours to get it running. When I saw the first stream of clear liquid rise through the tube, I knew I had done it. The analysis was unmistakable, extremely pure, zero toxic residue. A technology that could transform modern mining. I cried, not from joy, but from vertigo. Because I understood what it meant, power. The days that followed were a mix of obsession and fear. I knew something like this couldn't stay hidden forever. But I also knew that if I revealed it unprepared, I'd be devoured by the same corporations that had destroyed my grandfather. I needed protection. I needed allies. That's when Marcus Levin appeared. I met him by accident, or by fate, if you prefer to believe in such things. I had posted on a scientific forum under a pseudonym, seeking technical advice about certain catalysts. A few days later, I received a private message. I've seen your calculations. They're not theoretical. Someone's tested them. If it's yours, you need discretion. If it's not, you're already in danger. His profile was nearly empty. Just a name, an encrypted email address, and a short note, retired engineer. Germany. I replied cautiously. It took him 3 days to answer. Then we began speaking almost daily, first by email, then by video calls. His voice was deep, weary, but sharp. He'd spent decades in the mining industry until he was pushed out for exposing environmental violations. Your system is brilliant, he told me the first time he saw my grandfather's plans. But if you show it without legal protection, they'll take it from you within a week. You need to patent it under a new entity, and most importantly, do it far from your family name. And that's how Gale Energy Systems was born. Though on paper, the name Gale never appeared. I used initials and a fake address in Singapore. Marcus handled the trusted lawyers and opened an account through an ecological fund in Europe. I provided the technology. He provided the capital. I remember the day we signed the agreement. It was raining, a rarity in Perth, and the sound of water against the windows felt like a good omen. Marcus was in Berlin, I was in a cybercafe in Midland. When I hit send to confirm the contract, something shifted inside me. I was no longer the disinherited daughter. I was the keeper of a secret that could rewrite my fate. From then on, the ranch became the heartbeat of a new company. Marcus sent equipment, parts, microprocessors. I assembled everything by hand, surrounded by dust and solitude. Every breakthrough I filmed, every test I uploaded to an encrypted server. The industrial prototype came to life for the first time at 3:47 a.m. on a Sunday. The engine roared, the pressure held steady, and the liquid surged upward like a living current. I watched it in silence. It was beautiful. Precise. Pure. I thought of my mother, of her voice saying, "So she can learn the value of work," and I smiled. I had learned it. Just not in the way she imagined. Marcus arrived in Australia a year later. He came without warning, on a commercial flight, carrying only a backpack and a look that said everything. He'd seen terrible things in his lifetime. But when he saw the ranch, the improvised lab, the system running smoothly, something in his expression shifted. He smiled, almost tenderly. "Your grandfather would be proud," he said. I didn't know what to say. Something stirred inside me, a strange blend of gratitude and fear. He was the first person to step onto that land without judging me. That night we ate dinner beneath the open sky. Marcus spoke little, but every word carried weight. He told stories about ruined mines, corrupt governments, silenced scientists. And when he finally went quiet, the silence spoke louder than all of it. When we said goodbye, he took my hand gently. "Don't let this change you too much," he murmured. "Power always comes collecting." I didn't know it then, but that sentence would follow me for the rest of my life. In the months that followed, Gale Energy took root. Marcus secured contacts with investors in Canada and Japan. I stayed behind at the ranch, running operations from the shadows. The media began whispering about a new eco-friendly extraction technology developed by an independent group. No one knew I was behind it. And I preferred it that way. Sometimes, though, when Marcus called at the end of the day, his voice disarmed me. There was a closeness in it, something that stretched beyond business. Between calculations and strategy, silence would fall. Long silences. Words measured, restrained. Hints that neither of us dared name. One night, after a long meeting over video call, he said something that froze me. "Olivia, if all this fails, I'm still glad I met you." I couldn't answer. I just looked at him through the screen, and suddenly the air in the room felt thick, heavy. I didn't sleep that night. The first major contract came 2 years later. A Japanese multinational signed to use our method in the north. The stock soared. Gale Energy became a name that mattered. And then, inevitably, my family returned. Gemma was the first. She called from an unknown number. "Olivia, how are you?" "Alive," I said. She laughed, sharp, deliberate. "I'm glad. I've heard things about you. They say you're behind some energy company, is it true?" "That depends on who's saying it. We could talk, don't you think? Maybe we could help each other." "Gemma, if you're looking for help, start by learning how to ask without lying." She hung up without saying goodbye. 2 days later, I received an email from her lawyer. Subject: Intellectual property rights over Gale Energy Systems technology. I smiled. I'd been waiting for that move. Marcus had been right, power always comes collecting. And this was the bill. As I printed the document, the desert outside lit up with the first light of dawn. The wind carried the scent of metal and a distant storm. I watched it all through the lab window and thought about the irony of it. They had left me alone to humiliate me, and in that solitude, I found the only wealth they couldn't buy. I knew the war was just beginning. There's a particular kind of calm before a war breaks out. It's not silence, exactly. It's more like a held breath, as if the world were waiting for someone to make the first mistake. That's how I felt the morning the first court documents arrived. They sat stacked on the lab table, stamped and sealed, filled with empty arguments. Gemma and Aunt Charlotte claimed intellectual property rights inherited from engineer Arthur Gale, grandfather of the parties. They argued my company had unlawfully used technology developed within the family. That I had stolen a legacy. They were right, in a way. But what they'd never understand was that legacy can't be stolen. It can only be rescued. Marcus tried to convince me not to face the trial myself. "We can settle this with money, Olivia. You don't have to expose yourself." But I wanted them to see me. I wanted my name spoken by the judge, not the notary. We agreed on a strategy: reveal only what was necessary. The patents were registered under a legal structure so complex it was nearly indecipherable, spread across 3 countries, tied together by cross clauses only Marcus and I understood. I had planned for every crack, every shadow. I'd learned fast, real security doesn't lie in walls, it lies in the labyrinth. On the day of the first hearing, I wore black. Not for drama, just habit. I sat across from Gemma and Charlotte without looking away. Gemma smiled with the confidence of someone who's always won without earning it. Her lawyer spoke for nearly an hour: family trees, old records, fragments of incomplete patents. When my turn came, I said only this: my grandfather didn't leave blueprints. He left a warning. And no warning belongs to those who ignored it. The judge raised an eyebrow. Charlotte looked at me with something close to fear. Gemma, with pure hatred. That night, I called Marcus. He didn't answer. I called again and again until he finally picked up, his voice worn and tired. "I can't talk right now, Olivia." "What's happening?" I asked. "I had visitors in Berlin. People interested in buying your technology. And they don't seem to take no for an answer." The silence that followed was long and heavy. For the first time, I realized the fire we had started might be burning out of control. "Marcus, you have to hold on." "I don't know if I can. This is bigger than us." "I know. But if we fall, let's fall together." He didn't respond. I just heard his ragged breathing, and then the call went dead. I barely slept that night. The wind battered the windows, desperate to get in. I thought of him, his tired eyes, his rough hands, the way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't watching. There was tenderness there, yes, but also a warning. Marcus had lived inside the heart of corporations. He knew what was coming. At dawn, I checked the servers and found something alarming, an intrusion. Someone had tried to access the encrypted project files. I blocked the IPs, changed every password, moved the patent records to an offshore network. Paranoia became my new religion. In the days that followed, Perth swarmed with rumors. The media called it a legal battle for the control of Australia's energy future. Journalists camped outside the courthouse, cameras chasing Gemma's every move. She loved it, flashes, headlines, drama. I, on the other hand, just wanted it to end. But part of me enjoyed it too. I'd spent years hidden, silent, invisible. Now I could wield the same indifference my family had taught me, but sharpened into a weapon. Marcus vanished for 2 weeks. No calls, no emails. I started to fear the worst. Then one morning, when I opened the door to the lab, he was there, waiting. He looked gaunt. His beard had grown in, his eyes sunken. "Where were you?" I asked. "Getting to know the price of silence," he said. He set a folder on the table. Inside were photographs, contracts, names, politicians and businessmen. All linked to the Gale family and to illegal mining operations. Charlotte had used the family inheritance to cover up bribes and fund unlicensed extractions. "They want you to lose, Olivia," Marcus said. "Not for the money, but because if you win, this all comes out." I looked at the photos. Rage burned through the disgust, until what remained was something colder, clarity. "Then I can't lose. If you go through with this, you'll become what you hate." "Marcus." "I already have." He didn't answer. He just pulled me into a brief, dry embrace. A reminder that beneath all the machinery, there was still something human left. The final trial lasted 3 days. Gemma cried false tears on the stand. Charlotte refused to meet my eyes. Marcus testified remotely from Berlin. My lawyer presented the last piece of evidence, a dated, sealed registration in my name, filed before any family document, proving the patent was mine. When the judge read the verdict, the air in the room thickened. Exclusive ownership of the technology and patents is hereby recognized in favor of engineer Olivia Gale, founder of Gale Energy Systems. Gemma went pale. Charlotte shut her eyes. I breathed slowly, without smiling. It wasn't a victory. It was a burial. That night, Marcus and I stayed awake for hours, saying nothing. The ranch was no longer ruins. It had become a fortress, lit by solar panels and monitoring towers. The desert that had once been dust and despair now shimmered under the moon with a metallic glow. "What will you do now?" he asked. "Keep going. This is only the beginning. You could sell. Live in peace. And let others corrupt it? No. I didn't come this far to let the fire die." He stood, walked toward me, and looked at me as if trying to memorize my face. "Promise me you won't lose yourself." "I don't make promises I can't keep." Then he kissed me. It wasn't romantic, it was a pact, a spark in the dark, a way of saying there's no turning back now. I felt in his mouth the despair of a man who loves what he knows will destroy him. And when he pulled away, I understood, I would never see him the same again. Power had changed everything, even what we felt. The next morning, Marcus was gone. He said he needed to leave before he became my enemy. I believed him. He left a note on the table, "Don't forget, the fire burns the one who lights it, too." I laughed. The fire didn't burn me. It fed me. Months passed. Gale Energy expanded beyond imagination. Investments in Asia, projects in South America, contracts with governments. Everything we touched turned to white gold. I ran operations from Perth, surrounded by screens, data, and an army of advisors. But every night, when I returned to the ranch, I lit a candle before my grandfather's blueprints. Not out of faith, but remembrance. He had seen what no one wanted to see. And I had carried his vision further than he ever dreamed. Gemma sold her properties to cover the trial costs. Charlotte vanished. My parents were gone. And I was the last Gale standing. The sole owner of the desert. Sometimes the wind carried echoes of guilt. I learned not to listen. Because power has its own music. And once you learn its melody, silence no longer exists. They say power changes people. That's not true. Power doesn't change you. It simply reveals, with surgical precision, who you were all along. And for the first time, I saw myself, without filters. 3 years passed after the trial. Gale Energy Systems had become a global empire. Extraction plants in Chile, Argentina, Australia, Namibia. More than 7,000 employees. Dozens of patents. Contracts with governments that once ignored us. My face began to appear on the covers of financial magazines. The Lithium Queen, they called me. I never liked the title, but I'll admit, it wasn't entirely wrong. I'd learned to move among politicians and businessmen like a predator among sheep. I feared no one. In meetings, men looked at me with a blend of fascination and unease. I smiled little. Spoke less. Coldness had become my language. But when I returned to the ranch, my refuge, my altar, it all fell away. No assistants. No cameras. No secretaries. Just silence. And wind. And the ghost of Marcus. The last thing I ever received from him was a short, unsigned email. The fire doesn't distinguish between the wood and the one who lights it. I never replied. Not because I didn't want to. Because I knew he was right. Since he left, I had become what I once swore I'd never be. A cog in the same machine that destroyed my grandfather. But I did it with grace, with precision. With a kind of coldness that felt almost like art. And deep down, I loved it. My life became a schedule of private flights, meetings, and speeches about sustainability that sounded far better than they truly were. I said what everyone wanted to hear, that the future was green, that lithium was hope, that the planet needed heroes. No one asked about the ecological or human cost behind it all. No one wanted to know. Everywhere I went, the reception was the same: cameras, flowers, applause. Sometimes I felt like a secular saint. But at night, when the makeup melted and the lights went dark, only the emptiness remained, that silence no amount of money or recognition could fill. I started drinking more than I should have. Wine dulled the noise, helped me sleep a few hours. Sometimes I dreamed of Marcus. Not his face, his voice. Promise me you won't lose yourself. And every time I woke up, I found myself a little farther from that impossible promise. One morning, a British journalist came to visit. His name was Daniel Rooks, young, sharp, with the smug smile of someone who believes he can challenge you and walk away unscathed. "Ms. Gale, how did you manage to build an empire of clean energy without family or corporate backing?" he asked during the interview. "With hunger," I replied. "For power? For justice." Though in the end, they tend to look the same. The interview went viral. Social media raised me onto a pedestal, and, as always, began to look for cracks. They published theories about my past, about Marcus, about the trial. I didn't care. Lies are inevitable when truth makes people uncomfortable. But a week later, someone leaked internal documents from Gale Energy, reports on extraction waste, complaints from former employees, encrypted emails. Nothing illegal, but enough to stain the perfect image I had built. The world that had worshipped me began to doubt. I went straight to the source. An internal server had been breached from Europe. The IP address traced to Berlin. Marcus. It took me 2 days to decide whether to confront him. Finally, I boarded a private jet and showed up at his door, the same gray apartment where I had once seen him working through the night, surrounded by wires and blueprints. He opened the door with a look that was equal parts surprise and resignation. "I knew you'd come," he said. "Why did you do it?" "Because you forgot why you started all this." "I did it for us, Marcus." "No. You did it to prove you were above them all." I stared at him for a long time. He had aged, but his voice hadn't. It was still firm, clean. "You became your father, Olivia. And you became my judge." We stood in silence. Outside, it rained. Inside, the air smelled of hot cables and regret. "Marcus," I whispered, "if you came looking for redemption, mine isn't your kind." I turned and walked away. I didn't cry. I no longer knew how. Back in Perth, I ordered a total purge of the company. New passwords. Directors fired. Private cybersecurity hired. The fragility of the empire infuriated me. Everything could collapse with a single act of betrayal. I decided I would never depend on anyone. But that night, something changed. For the first time, I saw my reflection in the lab's glass wall, and didn't recognize myself. The eyes were the same, but the gaze, it was harder, metallic. It reminded me of those lithium fragments I had found years ago. Beautiful, yes, but deadly if you touch them for too long. The expansion continued. We opened a new plant in the Atacama Desert. Drones hovered over salt flats like silver swarms. The media called it a new energy renaissance. No one saw that every advance was also a scar. During the opening ceremony, as the Chilean president pinned a medal on my chest for contributing to sustainable progress, the whole performance felt absurd. The audience applauded, cameras flashed, and in my mind only one phrase echoed, Marcus's voice, "The fire doesn't distinguish." And it didn't. That night, in my hotel room, I opened the window and let the desert wind in. It carried a familiar scent, dust, heat, electricity. I thought of my grandfather. Of how it had all begun with a rusted box and a handwritten note. I thought of my father, of Gemma, of the family that had erased me. I thought of Marcus. And then I thought of myself, the woman who had learned to survive in nothingness. I didn't know whether to feel proud or ashamed. But I knew one thing, I wouldn't stop. I lit a candle on the table, a habit I had never abandoned, and watched the flame dance. In it, I saw the same strength, the same instability that lived in me. The fire didn't distinguish. Neither did I. That night, I signed a new deal with an Asian conglomerate, a contract that would double global lithium production within a year. One more step toward absolute control. As the ink dried, I realized something. I no longer feared the void. I had filled it with my own reflection. Months later, when I returned to the ranch, everything was different. What once had been dust was now metal and energy, solar towers, labs, antennas. The air smelled of ozone and the future. I sat before the old house, now restored, and looked toward the horizon. The desert that had once condemned me was now my kingdom. I thought of Marcus. Of his warning. Of my grandfather. Of everyone who had underestimated me. And as the sun fell, an idea began to bloom. The world doesn't need saints to save it. It needs monsters with a conscience. And I had already become one. They say every empire ends up devouring itself. I'm not so sure. Sometimes it simply evolves, until it no longer recognizes its own shadow. Mine, for instance, stopped being a company. It became an ideology. It's been 10 years since I found my grandfather's rusted box. 10 years since I slept on the dust of the ranch, lips cracked, heart burning with rage. Now that place is the nerve center of the greatest energy revolution of the century. Where there were once ruins, a structure of steel and glass now rises, glowing at night like a phantom city. Gale Energy Headquarters. Numbers no longer impress me. Thousands of employees. Contracts with over 30 governments. Alliances with global tech giants. And it all began with one word, unviable. Sometimes I walk the corridors of the main building and still catch the scent of the desert in the walls. I left it there on purpose, a reminder of who I was, and of what I had to destroy to become what I am. The press idolizes me and fears me in equal measure. Visionary. Patron. Dictator of lithium. I've grown used to the titles. They're just labels people invent to domesticate what they can't understand. I no longer give interviews. I don't justify my decisions. Speaking is a luxury the powerful don't need. Instead, I watch. And as I watch, the world rearranges itself to my design. But power has a strange way of becoming intimate. It isn't measured in contracts or figures. It's felt in small gestures. When a room falls silent as you enter. When a phone call shifts the course of a nation. When fear disguises itself as respect. And yet, inside that absolute silence, something is missing. Sometimes, in the middle of a meeting, my mind drifts, searching for him. Marcus. I never saw him again after Berlin. His name vanished from every record, as if he'd never existed. Some say he's dead. Others say he hides in a cabin up north, building wind turbines by hand. I don't know. But some nights, I swear I can hear his voice in the wind, whispering the same words as always. The fire doesn't distinguish. And I laugh, because he's right. The fire doesn't distinguish. But I learned how to control it. A few weeks ago, a delegation from the UN invited me to lead a global energy transition initiative. They call it the New Green Pact. I accepted, of course. Not because I trust their purity, but because I know no one else could do it without destroying everything. Sometimes you have to use dirty hands to keep the future clean. The night I signed the agreement, I boarded a helicopter and asked the pilot to take me to the ranch. Not the new one, with glass, drones, and security fences. The old one, the decaying wooden house that still survives at the edge of the property. I wanted to be there one last time, where it all began. I arrived at sunset. The sky burned red, as if the whole desert were on fire. I walked to the exact spot where I'd found my grandfather's box. The earth still smelled of rust and dust. I carried a leather folder with me. Inside were the final patents of Gale Energy, autonomous extraction systems, AI-driven mining, atmospheric control. Everything I had built. Everything I had yet to surrender. I sat on the ground and spread the pages out before a fire I lit with a solar spark. The flames began to lick the edges of the paper, slowly, as if hesitant. For a moment, I hesitated too. The wind rose, stirring dust and ash. On the horizon, the solar panels caught the fading light, mirroring my face over and over again. Thousands of Olivias, each reflecting a different choice, each ending here all the same. As the fire grew, I remembered my grandfather's words. The future of our blood isn't in the banks, it's beneath our feet. I had always thought he meant lithium, the buried wealth in the earth. But now I understood. He wasn't talking about the metal. He was talking about us. Our capacity to reinvent ourselves after being buried alive. I had dug so deep, inside and out, that there was nothing left to unearth. The desert had shaped me, power had polished me. I watched the fire until the pages turned to dust. Each spark was a memory. My mother telling me I would fail. My father signing the will. Gemma's smug smile. Marcus's voice whispering warnings in the dark. All of them burned the same. That's what power is, the ability to light the match without trembling. When the flames died, only heat remained. I looked up at the sky, an immense dome, not yet filled with stars. The silence was complete, but it no longer weighed on me. For the first time, I understood that there was no way back. And no need for one. The world kept spinning out there, powered by the energy I had unleashed. Every battery, every motor, every spark carried a trace of my legacy. And that was enough. I rose, brushed the dust from my hands, and looked once more at the embers. The fire was still there, steady, obedient. It didn't consume me. It reflected me. And in that reflection, I saw what I had always been. A woman born of the desert. Forged by abandonment. Crowned by the future. An heir of the fire.